Hello, I'm James from Woodland Classroom. Welcome to my online Winter Tree ID workshop. Now, before we get started with the workshop itself, I want you to know that this is the second of 2 workshops that I've run. So there's another workshop called Kickstart Your Winter Tree ID Skills. If you haven't seen that, I recommend you checking that one out first before you watch this one, because in that one we go through some basic principles to really get you grounded in winter tree identification. We talk about how to understand Latin names and some other real basic grounding principles, and we also go through a whole bunch of trees that we don't talk about here, so I'll leave the link to that in the description below. Otherwise, in this workshop, welcome, and we're going to be covering the following topics in this workshop which we didn't cover in the last one, and that includes elder versus older, 2 trees that can get confused because of similar names. We're going to look at 3 trees in winter: field maple, hazel and the larch. We're going to look at beech versus hornbeam, 2 trees that don't sound similar but certainly look similar, especially in winter. So we're going to be looking at the similarities and differences we can pick out between those 2. We're also going to be looking at the ash tree in focus and really look at the details to pick out there in winter so we can really get to know it. I'm also going to be recommending a bunch of resources. I get asked a lot about the best tree ID books and other resources so you can get into identifying trees for yourself. So I'm going to go through that, as well as sharing my own free tree ID course that I've created here online and how you can access that and get a whole bunch of free tree identification resources. So with all that said, on with the show. Okay, let's do our first comparison with 2 species that people often get confused: the older and the elder. We've already briefly mentioned the elder. These are 2 very different trees, but called very similar names. But once we get to know the principles of them, we'll see that they're very different. Let's have a look at these 2 trees. Right, older, Almus glutinosa. Older is a tall tree. It can grow to 25 meters. It can be a big, tall tree. And that fact will become important later. But as we tune in, perhaps we're near a wet area, there's water nearby, we're tuning in and we're thinking, okay, older likes to grow in wet spaces. I'm likely to see alders and willows perhaps, because they like wet ground as well. So we're tuning in, we're beginning with a branch, and here we go. We can see a fantastic cluster of identifying features here, and particularly the picture on the left has pretty much everything you need to know about older in one picture. And as I said again, begin with a branch. All the information is there. So we can see there that the buds are alternate on the branch, and that's important when comparing it to elder. The buds are purple, which is really striking, and actually they're beautiful. We made some Christmas wreaths out of them late last year, which is nice, and had a bit of a splash of colour, something a bit different. But those purple buds really do stand out once you notice them. There's nothing else that really has those, so that's really key. Certainly that shade of purple, that violety purple with a slight kind of hairy fuzziness to the buds. Secondly, we have, let's have a look. We'll talk about those other features in a second because we've got closer pictures, but here we go. Picture on the left, we have the young twig there, the younger branch on the left, very smooth, dark bark, almost kind of a dark green colour, with these white spots scattered all over it. These white spots appear on a lot of trees. Sometimes they look a little bit different from others. These are called lenticels, and they're breathing pores on the tree, on the bark. And on the older, they are kind of whitey yellow colour and scattered throughout the young branch there. So we're looking for that, and that smooth, dark bark. Because actually everything about the older is dark. When I see it, it's a tree that kind of sucks the light in, apart from these beautiful purple buds. So it's got a whole dark hue to it. On the right, we have the male catkins, which we're seeing now in winter. As it says there, these ones are a little bit in poor condition. They're a little bit past their best. You can see they're ragged on the edges there. But in the previous picture, we saw some in better condition just here. These purple male catkins, which kind of match the colour of the buds there as well. So more purple on the branch. Look out for that. They're going to get bigger as the winter goes on, as the winter matures and the buds mature as well. Here's the female flowers, or the female catkins, more purple on the end of the twig. They look almost like fuzzy hair, don't they? Like felt or something, but that's a real kind of striking pink colour, really beautiful and something to look out for on the older there. And then the big thing, we'll do the bark first. The bark here, as I said, dark, craggy, lots of character when it gets old. Very contrasting to that young bark that we saw a moment ago, which is very smooth. And also look on the picture on the right, lots of multiple growth coming from the bottom. Older does regrow from being cut back quite well. You can see here a lot of what they call epicormic growth, lots of little twigs branching out there. And then here, for me, is the defining factor, the older cones. These are the mature female flowers. This is the result of all their work, and now they have shed their seeds and they're left hanging on the branch in winter. They're not true cones like pine cones, but we call them cones because that's an easy way to remember them. But it's the only broadleaf tree with large leaves that we're going to see in the countryside that has these cones. So if you see them, it's older. Can't be anything else. And again, here you go, it's by water, so that's a big clue. And lastly, look at the picture on the left. You can see it a little bit on the one on the right. Look at the form of the tree. The branches are very horizontal, and that's really characteristic of older. And when we get really good at our tree ID, we can start to notice these features from far off. So we're already thinking, oh, I'm in wetland areas. Well, there's a tree that has these horizontal branches and it's got a dark hue to it. That's going to be older. So we can start to recognize that from a distance as well. Let's crack on with elder. Oh no, there's a collection actually of older twigs. Lots of things there, some leaves, cones, buds, catkins, everything, the whole kit and caboodle there, everything you need to know about older in winter. Okay, this is elder now with an E. Straight away, a very different beast. It's a shrubby, messy tree, much smaller. Probably grows to maybe 6 meters maximum, sometimes a little bit more, but very, very scrubby and messy, very much a part of the understory, whereas older is coming up into the canopy of the woodland areas. And this one has very characteristic bark, strongly fissured, but also it's very corky. If you feel it with your thumb and push your thumbnail into it, it will give. And there's not many trees that do that, so look out for that. Older won't do this, but elder will. A corky bark for the mature bark there. And here you go, this is something else interesting about elder. At this time of year, in January, it's the first native tree to come into leaf. It's the first broadleaf tree to come into leaf. So you're going to see some of that in January. I wonder if anybody is seeing that already. If you are, pop in the chat room so we can have a look. But look out for elder being a very early leafer. And I certainly saw it this time last year, and I'll be looking out for it as well over the next week. Here's something else you want to look at on elder as well. We've got, this is called jelly ear fungus, and this grows on dead elder. You can see it here, really kind of, it looks like an ear. It's all rubbery, and when it's dry, the weather, it goes all very crispy and shrinks down, and then as it rains, it swells with the water and it's rubbery. This is actually a wild food, but that's a subject for another time. But look out for this fungus because it's pretty much closely associated with elder. You do get it on sycamore, dead sycamore as well, but elder is the one I really associate it with. Let's have a quick look there. Straight away, we're coming back to that question about alternate or opposite. And there's no doubt there that those are opposite buds, as we can see. They are purple though. Those are just sprouting, just about to come into leaf, as you can see. But also, let's have a quick look there at that picture. You can see again, we saw this earlier, are opposite buds in pairs. And also, those bumps across the bark, those spotted lenticels, not a different colour there, the same as the rest of the bark, but still noticeable. And there's a picture of elder as a messy, scrubby tree. It tends to have a lot of straight shoots coming up, long straight shoots like arrow straight rods coming up, reaching for the sky, so look out for that as well. A lot of messy growth, an untidy tree, if you will. Okay, and of course, other times of the year, it becomes a lot easier to recognise because we've got elderberries in autumn and elderflowers in summer as well. So we know those for any wild foodies out there. Okay, there's a good close shot of the elder buds as well, clearly in opposite pairs. Okay, folks. Right, so what we're going to do now is go through quickly 3 trees to look out for in winter. Okay, we're going to go through the field maple, the hazel, and the larch, something a bit exotic. So let's have a quick look at some of the defining features for those. And this is what I'd like to do with trees, is break down the kind of 4, 5, 6 things you need to know about the tree in order to identify it, rather than giving off reams of information. And then just with those few things, you can get on and identify the tree and then find out more about it. So let's have a look firstly at, should be, field maple. Here it is from a distance. And I started from a distance because we're approaching the tree here, and from a distance there's not too much we can say about it really. It could be a lot of things. For anyone very keen-eyed there, you might notice, are the twigs arranged in opposite pairs or alternately? Don't look at the text at the bottom of the screen because it gives it away. But they are in opposite pairs, as we'll see as we go close to the twigs here. Field maple, by its name, is a maple tree, one of the aces, and all maples have opposite paired buds. So the sycamore, the Norway maple, which is very much planted out in the countryside on roadsides and retail parks, and any exotic maples that we bring in from other parts of the world, they all have their buds in opposite pairs. So straight away, that whittles down our list to what we're looking at. Also, we've got a collection here of various things to spot. You can see the maple-shaped leaves. We'll have a look at those properly in a minute. But have a look at the winged seed cases here, the helicopters that people call them. We tend to think of those with sycamore, and the helicopters there tend to be more of a kind of a downward shape like this, pointed down at kind of 45 degrees. But with the field maple, typically they are at 90 degrees to each other. So the two wings are not down, they are flat to each other. Not always, but mostly they are like that. And that's a really good thing to look out for. They're also a little bit smaller than the sycamore seeds that you get. But they do have helicopters. And in winter, you might see some of them still hanging on the twig, like we can see here. Here's some leaf litter on the floor, and what this picture really shows with the field maple is the range of leaf shapes that are there. You can see one that's just got 3 lobes, this little one here, but most of them have 5 lobes here. But even there's different characters, some more rounded, some a little bit more pointed. So there's a bit of variety. But think of the Canadian flag and the maple leaf. That's what you're looking for with field maple. If you see that shape of leaf, which is known as palmate, because it's like an open hand, an open palm, you're probably looking at a maple. It could be sycamore if it's bigger, or Norway maple, but if it's small, you know, this kind of size, we're talking field maple there. And here's another interesting thing with the bark, what I call ridges that look like a crocodile's back. And these actually give with your thumb as well. You can depress them and they squash down. Not all field maples have these, but a lot of them do. And you see these ridges looking like the back of a crocodile, those ridges that they have, that has got to be field maple. There's nothing else it could be. And actually we've got a picture here of it on more mature bark, a larger branch. This is about so thick, it's a good size. So you can see that those ridges do stay on a lot of the field maples for a while. So look out for that. It's a really good characteristic to find. Let's go on to another tree. Let's go on to hazel, which is probably one of our most common trees out in the hedgerow, woodland edges. Again, like the elder, a tree of the understory. It doesn't get too tall, and it's a very shrubby tree that grows with lots of growth from the base. It responds to coppicing very well, so lots of growth coming up from the base there. Is it alternate or opposite? Have a look at that twig there, folks, and it's alternate. The other thing you can see very carefully, if you look carefully, specifically here where the cursor is, the twig is hairy. There's a little rhyme, hairy hazel. If you remember that and think of hairy twigs, when you feel a hazel twig, you'll feel it better rather than see it. It's hard to pick up on the camera, but there is a fuzzy, bristly hair there, a bit like kind of the hair on a pig. Look out for hairy hazel twigs. The buds as well are quite rounded, and they're usually quite green, sometimes a bit red, but usually quite a bright green colour. But what you might well see at this time of year with hazel is this, which I've pointed out, which is one of the key features of winter, the male catkins. Remember, we had these with alder earlier, they were purple. Well, in hazel, they're a yellow-green colour, and they have a country name of lamb's tails, and the picture on the left needs no explanation as to where that's come from. But on the picture on the right there, you can see how you can spot those male catkins, the lamb's tails, from a way off as you approach a tree. And if you're seeing it festooned with all those catkins, and of course lots of this growth sprouting from the bottom of the tree because it's very shrubby, it's got to be hazel. It can't be anything else. And those lamb's tails start off smaller, like we saw with the alder earlier, and they grow and expand. And before Christmas, I saw some catkins like this, big and mature, ready to let out their pollen. So they've been taking advantage a little bit of the warmish spell we had in winter. I wonder how they fared now with the snow and frost. But usually January, kind of early February is when you see all the lambstails out. And you'll also see something else, which is this. And you might spot this now out on the hazel. This is a small flower. I've blown this up for size, but it looks like a little sea anemone poking out of a little rock face. And this is the female flower. The male pollen from the catkins floats across on the same tree to this female flower here and pollinates that. And it's that female flower, that flash of beautiful red scarlet, that becomes the nut later in the autumn. So if you've got a little field lens, it's a lovely thing to take out and look for these. You can see them with the naked eye fine, but you can appreciate them more with a lens. But look out for that. There's a red sea anemone and the red scarlet flower. It's beautiful. One of winter's few splashes of colour that we get from our native trees, and very unique to hazel. Here's a nice collection of stuff that we see. Hazelnut shells there we might find. Also the hazel twig. Notice the zigzag. Do you see that? Wych elm does this as well. But that zigzag shape is something you do get with hazel. It's something you can spot up in the canopy as you approach the tree. And we've got some fallen leaf litter here as well. Here's some close-up nuts. Again, the nuts aren't going to fall far from the tree. So unlike leaves that can blow away, the nuts are pretty much going to stay close to where they fell. And here you can see lots of different nibbles here. And some trackers can tell the difference, and ecologists as well can tell the difference as to which animal has chewed the nutshell, whether it's a vole, whether it's a jay that's broken it open, or a squirrel that's cracked it open and chewed it apart. And they can tell which animal's been feeding on the hazelnuts there, which is pretty cool. But that's what we're looking for under the trees. Mature trees, of course, the younger trees will not be producing nuts quite yet. And there's some hazel, typical hazel growth. You see this in the hedgerow, on bank sides, lots of straight rods coming from the base, from what they call the stool, growing up from the base, and that's what we get with hazel. So look out for all of that. Okay, folks, let's get straight on. Okay, larch. Larch is not a native tree, it's a conifer. So it has needles for leaves. But the reason why I've included it is because it's an easy conifer to recognize in winter. Here it is in autumn. And in autumn, the needles go golden in colour. And this is interesting. Let's have a little look close up. You can see those golden autumn needles there. And the reason why they go golden is because this is the one conifer we have over here that drops all its needles in winter, well, in autumn, ready for winter. So it's easy to spot in winter, because if you're seeing a conifer with no needles on it, it's either dead or it's a larch. And most of the time it's going to be a larch. And so that's what we're looking for. We can see the outline here. It's lost all its needles and we're just seeing the bare branches. The green that you're seeing on the left there is lichens and moss, which is on that one. As I said, in autumn, they drop their needles, and then in winter, they're all gone. So this is a tree that breaks the rules. And we like trees that break rules because it makes them easy to spot. Because you think, hang on a minute, there's a conifer there, it hasn't got any needles on it, it's not being evergreen. It's got to be a larch. Okay, so that's the one. Here it is up close. You can see this outline. You can see some cones hanging on in the branch there. And have a look on the twigs. Can you see all the little lumps and bumps there? They're really characteristic, and those are the little pegs that sit all the way along the branch. I'm going to teach you a little rhyme that was taught to me by Dave Watson from Woodland Survival Crafts. So thanks to Dave for this one. Lots of lumpy larch. So 3 L's. Lots of lumpy larch. So there's lots of those lumps on larch, and you see them on the branch there. If you see that on the outline at the end of the twigs and those little cones, it's larch. So remember those lumps. It's a really easy way to remember this tree. And here's a collection of cones up close. I've got a few here live in studio too. They're smallish cones, but when they fall under the tree, they mostly fall still attached to the twig, whereas something like a pine cone tends to not fall attached to the twig, same with spruce. Whereas these fall generally attached to the twig already, and usually there's more than one of them. They can be clustered together. These ones have opened out a bit because they've been in the house for a few days, but normally they'd be more closed than this. But just for a size comparison, there they are alongside Scots pine. We've got larch cones on the left and Scots pine on the right, so they're a little bit smaller. And certainly when they're close up outside, those larch cones appear probably a third smaller again, I would say. So look out for those. Lots of lumpy larch, cones attached to twigs, and no needles in winter. It's an easy one to recognise. And look out, of course, for the new growth in spring. Also, I have to share this. This is a basket made from larch twigs that my friend Lizzie made from Pippin and Jar Bushcraft. Larch is actually a fantastic material to use to make baskets with, and it's very flexible. So it's just a beautiful bit of craft. So if you're out IDing trees, have a play with some natural bushcraft as well at the same time. Okay, folks. So those are 3 trees to look out for in winter, going through all those principal parts of them. Now, I had a question from Gillian Black. I hope she's watching. Hello, Gillian, if you are. She said, can you tell me the difference between beech and hornbeam? Because they are very similar. And she's right, they are very similar. And I thought, that's a good question. I'm going to feature it in the workshop. Beech and hornbeam are 2 trees which are very similar. They are more common down in the south of England, but you do get a lot of them in West Wales and planted elsewhere. They are trees that prefer a slightly warmer climate than at the edge of their range here in the UK. But we have planted them all over the UK. So even though naturally they only came across the land bridge into southern England, we've planted them all over the place since. But generally, typically, you get more of them down south. But let's have a look at the difference between the 2 here. It's hard enough in summer, to be honest. Here we go. One of these is hornbeam, one of these is beech. They can look quite similar. But first of all, let's go to beech on the right, because that's probably the one that more people are familiar with. Look at the top part of the tree there, this very smooth bark. This is quite an old specimen here that we've got. Very smooth, grey, greenish bark. And it stays smooth pretty much throughout its whole life. It will crack up a little bit. We can see a bit of that there. But generally, it's one of the only trees that keeps smooth bark even in old age. So look out for that. Also, it has these larger buttresses of roots which can spread out. And you're also going to see a lot of leaf litter on the floor. But we'll get to that. On the left here, we have the hornbeam as well. Now, the hornbeam, at first glance, could look a little bit similar, those spreading roots at the buttress, the bottom of the tree there. But look at this deep fissured line that goes up the middle of the trunk here. And we can see another line coming up here, and there's another one coming up here. This is what they call a fluted trunk. I like to think of it as like a Greek or Roman column with your bumps going around it like this. Beech doesn't do this. Hornbeam does. It tends to have it can be smooth, not as smooth as beech, but more bumped, like a Roman or Greek column on its trunk. That's a really key thing to look out for. Okay. Secondly, let's have another look at the beech here. There's typical smooth beech bark, almost looks like muscle, like corded muscle underneath. We can see those humps and bumps there, and just the odd fissure. Here's hornbeam on the left, beech on the right. So hornbeam, similar colour, but much more fissured and more of these long, kind of deep rivulets going vertically up and down the trunk, whereas beech is the one that people always carve their names into. It's the one where the name stays. If you see in the carving, it's probably beech, but behind all that carving, look how smooth that bark actually is if those carvings weren't there. So that's really key. But with beech, this is one thing you're not going to get with hornbeam. Under a mature beech, look on the floor. And in fact, close your eyes and just walk around and crunch with your feet. And if you're feeling the crunches, you've probably got a load of this stuff, which is beech mast. And the beech mast is crunchy, it's hard, some of it here. If you leave it in the house too long, it opens up. And they're these hairy little nut cases, or the husks, or the mast as they're known, which hold the beech nuts. The beech nuts are actually wild food that you can eat. But a mature tree will have the woodland floor littered with these. So look out for those. The hornbeam don't have these at all. So think beech mast, beech nuts, it's going to be the beech tree above me. Okay, and of course, because they're heavy, they don't fall far from the tree, so they're very reliable, whereas leaf litter can blow away, whereas these are going to fall pretty much where they come from. So it's a good, reliable thing to look out for. Some years you get mast years where you get a lot of this beech mast. You can see it close up here. There's the nuts that are inside there, and sometimes on a good year you can open up those brown shells there and find a nice little edible nut to eat, so give that a try for yourself. A lot of them can be empty, but think of them as a kind of hard, hairy eggs that open up like that. That's a good way to think of them. Look for that beech mast. Let's look at hornbeam. Very different story. On the left here, We have something that a cluster of seed heads, wing seed heads, which reminds us of sycamore and field maple because they spread by wind dispersal. So there's a little couple of nutlets, as they're called, at the base of that, and that flies off with the wind. But that arrangement where they're all dangling down vertically on top of each other, you can either describe it as a feather duster or a toilet brush, however best you remember it. A feather duster or a toilet brush. They will still be hanging on, some of them in winter. Most of them you can see in autumn, of course, but the odd one will be hanging on, so it's good to look out for it. And if you slow down and tune in and investigate under the woodland floor, you may well see some of what's in my hand there, these little wing seed cases here, which can blow off away from the tree. But if you're looking for those, you might find them, and they're a really good sign that you've got hornbeam there. So look out for those guys. Let's go to the buds. I've already talked about the most obvious differences. The buds are a little bit more tricky because they are both, in both cases of trees, the buds appear on slender twigs. They are both alternately laid out on the branch, and they are both pointed slender buds. These are the beech, very slender pointed buds, kind of spear-like or lanceolate as they call them. They're kind of brown, brownish in colour, kind of a buff brown. Here's the beech collection. Here's something else that we're going to see in a minute as well. We've got the beech nuts, but look at the branch at the top. Do you see how the leaves are still connected to the twig there? That's very common with young beech. The leaves are still attached, the dead leaves, to the branch. Young oak do this as well, but so do hornbeam, young hornbeam. And this is one of the reasons why beech and hornbeam are used in formal hedgerows, because they give that extra bit of shelter in winter, because a lot of them, when they're young, do hang on to those dead leaves. That's another reason why you could confuse them. And the leaf litter does look similar. We can see the leaf litter in the top corner, that orange oval classic leaf shape. That's your beech. But with the hornbeam, here's the buds. We just saw the, I'm going to go back so you can see, there's the beech buds. Here's hornbeam, long and slender, but a bit fatter. And the scales, I think, are much more visible here. These are just beginning to burst, these ones here. You can see hints of green. But there's a crisscross pattern here, which reminds me of like a pine cone patterning. I think it looks a bit like that. So look out for that as well. And also notice that these buds sometimes come in clusters. We can see pairs and clusters of 3 there, whereas beech don't do that. Something else to look out for. And in the middle here, we have more hornbeam, that zigzag shape that we saw with Hazel earlier. But look how close those buds are to the branch as well. And there's some leaf litter. Now, the leaf litter looks very similar to beech, so it's not the best to differentiate between the two. But if you want to look close, the leaf litter of hornbeam has a toothed or serrated edge, whereas beech have a smooth edge to them. So those are the differences there. So there you go, beech and hornbeam. 2 trees to look out for in winter that can look similar, but a lot of similarities. But if we tune in and we look for those differences, we're really going to get to know them and understand what we're looking at there. Okay, let's move on to another tree. We're going to move on to ash. Okay, so moving on to ash, let's get some pictures on here. Ash is a really good one for everybody to know because it's got some really key features that make it really unmistakable. Here we are approaching ash from a distance. Okay, and we can see here not too much distinctive to look at. We're going to have to get a bit closer. If you look carefully, you might see that the branches are arranged in opposite pairs. You can see that here, for instance, just there, that pair, clearly in opposites. You've got to get your eye in. Let's begin with a branch. And here we go. Those black buds, pointed buds at the tip of the twig, in pairs. It's got to be ash on a smooth grey twig as well. It can't be anything else. They're so distinctive. You can see there's a bit of variety there in the size and arrangement, but the buds are all in opposite pairs. Somebody said to me, one of my students said, the terminal bud, the one on the tip, reminds them of a Phillips screwdriver. So that's a good way of remembering it. So think of that, the black Phillips screwdriver head. There's your ash, very distinctive, and there it is close up. We can really see that screwdriver shape now. You can even see 2 little buds below the terminal bud there. And yeah, that's what to look out for with ash. And actually this can be really useful as well, because we're going to see this longer than any other winter twig, because ash are one of the first trees to lose their leaves in autumn, and they're one of the last trees to come into leaf in late spring. So this winter twig is something we're going to see for a long time, so it's a good one to know. Here we go, here's the ash bark, a bit like beech, very smooth and grey. But the difference is with ash, when it gets old, it does fissure and become much more craggy with age. But generally, from young to mid-age, you've got that smooth grey bark. And there we go, some really good black buds there, and that screwdriver shape. Here's something else to look for with ash. These keys, bunches of keys, and you're going to see this silhouette when you're driving along on the side of the road. Obviously, you're looking where you're going, but you see these bunches of keys hanging down like this in the canopy, and you'll see this on most ash. Not on all of them, but most of them. And they're really distinctive, and you can see up close they're actually brown. As the winter goes on, there's less of them, but right now you're going to see a lot of these heavy bunches of what they call keys, the seeds, which are all individual little wings there, hanging on the branches there, right through the canopy, and you can spot ash a mile off. Something else to look out for with ash. We talked before about the opposite paired branches. If you look high up in the canopy, you might see this, what I like to call a devil's pitchfork. The leading branch there and two either side, and that's ash. We can even see the silhouette there of those buds quite clearly. So again, as we get to know a tree, we can start to really recognize it from a distance as well. And that's when we can really start to show off. And here we go. Here's slightly older ash bark. It does get even more craggy than this, but I want to just show you it starting to fissure up and crack, so you knew that it wasn't always smooth like the beech usually is as well. So look out for that. And actually, as it gets very old and craggy, it can be easy to confuse it with oak. It looks kind of similar, but oak has alternate buds and much more of a buff brown or dark brown colour, whereas the ash, as we know, are black and in opposite pairs. So it can't be anything else. One last thing to say about ash is that it likes to seed very prolifically. So all those bunches of keys will blow off the tree and spin down and spread themselves all over the woodland, given the chance. Which is a good thing, because the ash is under threat from ash dieback disease at the minute. So the more young ash we can get coming up, hopefully they'll be so much resistant to that disease. But what we're seeing here is a sea of young ash trees coming up, and you might see that in a woodland, and we've got mature ash above it. Look out for that, but the floor just peppered with young ash seedlings coming up. Okay, folks, so that's the ash tree in winter. Oh, we're already running out of time. Let's move straight on. One thing that people have asked me a lot about is recommended resources. Okay, so where can I get some resources? What books do you recommend, or other things for identifying trees in winter? So I thought I'd share some of that stuff with you guys and let you know where there are some resources that I've created as well that you could use for identifying trees. So the first book I recommend is the Collins Guide, Complete Guide to British Trees. That is a really good one, easy to find, and lots of good information there. Very photo-based, this book. I prefer illustrations, but it is useful to have both to refer to. I'll say something else about this book in a minute. So that's Collins' Complete Guide to British Trees. The other one that I use is an older book. I think they keep reprinting it. It's the Reader's Digest Field Guide to Trees and Shrubs of Britain. I really like this one. Like the other Collins Guide there, it's not the easiest one to take out in the field with you, but it is good. And the thing about this one is it has some really lovely illustrations as well as some photos. And I like the illustrations because an artist can really pick out those key features and highlight them, whereas a photo is sometimes difficult to do that, depending on the light. Both of these books also have good winter twig pictures in them as well, and pictures of bark. But what I would say about these two books is, for the beginner, and even for me, you could probably get rid of half the pages in each of these books and they'd still be just as useful to you for identifying trees, because there's a lot of stuff in here that you're just probably not going to come across. So there's almost too much information in these, but they're good books. One thing I would recommend is this one, Winter Trees, Photographic Guide to Common Trees and Shrubs. They all sound the same, don't they? This one's published by the Field Studies Council. So you can go into their website to look at that, and it's very thin. Look how thin that is in comparison. So this is more friendly for the hiker. This really boils it down to the essential information of the most likely kind of 30-odd trees you're going to see. It's very photo-based, breaks it all down with key features, really good stuff. So I recommend that. That's published by the Field Studies Council, FSC. Great little book. And they've also made this. This isn't a book, but it's a fold-out chart called the tree name trail. And this is a key. So you ask questions of the key, and depending on the answer, yes or no, it's going to lead you down to a different tree species. Well, down different questions until you eventually end up with what you're looking for. This is great piece of kit to have. But of course, you might notice it's got leaves all over it, which means it's only really useful in the summer, not so good in winter. But for any other time of the year, when the leaves are on, this is a great bit of kit. Field Studies Council produced this called the Tree Name Trail. It's about £3.50, £4. Great little piece of kit, and it weighs hardly anything, so very highly recommended. If you're interested in the folklore of trees and more of a kind of the deeper esoteric side of things with trees, I'd recommend this book. It's a beautiful book, really speaks to our country's love of trees and our connection with them. It's called Walking with Trees by Glennie Kindred. Really lovely book, quite recent, only a couple of years old, and really good stuff, lots of folklore about common trees in Britain. Really beautiful read. And Glennie Kindred, the author, is going to be a guest on our wild food workshop later this month. So if you're interested in wild food and want to put your questions to Glennie, the author, be sure to be on that one as well. But of course, there's all those resources, but I've created my own, which I'm going to recommend to you. It's a free course. And this is what I mentioned as an exciting announcement. Some of you guys might already be on this one as well that are watching. It's called Kickstart Your Tree ID Skills. It takes you through 3 native tree species in 4 seasons. So you can start now in winter, and then you can watch videos and see photos for spring, summer, and autumn. And you can follow a tree like the ash through all 4 seasons and see the different things to look out for with it and what is the key feature in that particular season. I go into a bit of folklore as well, go into the historic uses of the woods as well and where you're going to find them, how to identify the trees from a distance. And it's free to sign up to. It's been my passion project that I've created over lockdown as our response to the whole pandemic, not being able to teach things out in the woods, but teach things online instead. And there's loads of information there. For instance, you get these cheat sheets here, which I've made, which you can either download to your phone, and you can view them on your phone when you're out in the woods, like you would a PDF document, or you can print them off. And you can see Hazel, field maple, ash, there in 4 different seasons, and you pick out the different key features. I've broken it down, a bit like that book I mentioned earlier. I've broken down the 4 or 5 things you need to know about each tree, what to look for in that season. And the videos are based around this, and the cheat sheets reinforce that, along with photo galleries that we have. So there's loads of photos on there of the trees, looking at bark, leaves, the spring catkins, leaf litter. We also have photos I've taken in studio as well, where you can really look at the different details, such as the summer leaves or the autumn seeds and fruits coming on. So that's called Kickstart Your Tree ID Skills. I said it's free to sign up for, and actually I'm going to send you an email or with a link to that so you can sign up if you've not already and try that out. I'd love you to try it. Let us know what you think. And if you like that, there's a further step you can go on, and that is called the Complete Tree ID course. And that can take you up to 40 trees, 40 of our native and common trees in Britain in all 4 seasons. And that's a year-long course I've created. And this is the really big project that we've created as our response to lockdown. And it's been going great. We've been getting some great feedback. And actually, on Monday next week, I'm going to release a special offer to all of you who have attended this workshop. It's open to you guys. And on Monday, we're going to offer something special there as a big discount if you're interested. So what I would say, if you enjoyed this workshop, check out the free course. If you like that, have a look at the Complete Tree ID course. And on Monday, there's going to be a special offer released for that. So do check that out, because it's going to be the best offer we've done so far. So I'm really keen that while everyone's locked down, we can all enjoy nature and get out there and really maybe improve our tree knowledge and understand the natural world around us. So I'm really hoping I will see you on that. Okay, folks. Of course, if you have any questions about that, do ask. But let's get to questions, because lots of people have questions, and we're going to do as many as we can. One question that was sent in advance, I'm going to do this one first, but if you have a question, pop it in the chat room now and I'll start answering them as best I can. But one that was put to us that I want to share with you was a picture that was sent in. And this was sent in by Yvonne Gold. I hope you're here, Yvonne. Hello. And she said, what tree is this? She sent in the picture on the left, the large twisted trunk. And I've added the other 2 pictures on the side to help everybody out. She said, what's going on here? I'm seeing this really twisted trunk out in the park. What's going on with this tree? Is this natural? Is there something going wrong? This is totally natural. The pictures on the right will give you a real clue as to what this is, especially the one in the bottom corner there. We've got those spiky chestnut husks. This is the sweet chestnut, which you will see out and about. And naturally, it has this twisted trunk to it. And that's a really key feature, especially in winter, to look out for. The other thing you're going to see is those husks sitting on the floor. And there's a nut and there's a shape of the leaf as well, those large spiky leaves. But the young bark is very different. Reminds me of older, actually, dark green with those spots. So that's the sweet chestnut, Yvonne. There you go. That's the answer to your question. Another question we had while we're here, folks, is Helen Armstrong. Hello, Helen. You emailed in. You asked, why do some holly leaves have a spiky edge and some have a smooth edge? What's going on here? That is down to their defense against browsing animals. So what they do is, you'll notice typically with holly trees that the lower leaves are spikier than the ones at the top, out of browsing reach of animals where they're smooth. And the spikes are to deter animals from eating them. So that's what it's a defense mechanism. But the leaves at the top don't need to have that, because we don't think we've ever had giraffes in this country. Maybe a long time ago, who knows? But up top, they're nice and safe. So they don't need to put that spiky growth on. So that's what's going on there. So have a look at a mature holly tree next time you're there, Helen, and look at the leaves at the bottom, and then cast your eye up and see, do they continue to be spiky? Are they less spiky at the top? See what's going on. Let's do some questions from everybody else. Let's see what we've got. Questions. Somebody says the free intro course is great. Thanks very much. Thanks, Nikki. Right. Broadly speaking, how would you estimate how old a tree is? Harry, that is the question that every tree person hates, because aging a tree is really difficult. The best way to age a tree is to cut it down and have a look at the rings, which of course we don't want to do we, most of the time? So what we can do, Harry, is do an approximation. And that's where that tuning in comes, because if we're on an estate, for instance, we might think, okay, when were these planted? Is there a record of when these were planted? For instance, there's an old sweet chestnut tree at the Church Castle estate, a National Trust property near me, which is 550 years old. They know that because it's on the planting record. But also look at the context around us about what there is. When was the land last managed? Do we know the history of that? Is that going to help tell us? As we get to know which trees grow faster and which trees grow slower, we start to understand, by looking at the diameter, what the approximate age would be. But knowing the exact age of the tree is very difficult, really. And then with old veteran trees, of course, they rot from the inside out. Think of something like an oak with a rotten centre. So now we can't count the rings because they've all gone. So aging a tree is a difficult thing to do. There are methods you can do where you measure the girth at chest height, or breast height they call it, where you measure the girth and you can get a general approximate age based on the species of what it is. But you've got to be careful with that, because you've got to think about context. If a tree is crowded in a woodland, it's not going to put on a girth as quickly as if it's out in the middle of a field where it's got more light and space to spread out. So there can be different forces at play. But there are approximations we can make. Graham Hart says, what are the best ways of telling silver birch and downy birch apart? You can do it in the winter, Graham. The best thing to do is to wait until summer. It's a lot easier. But they are very similar, the two trees, very closely related, and they occupy the same kind of space of the woodland, the same kind of age. But with the silver birch, Betula pendula, think of that pendula word, it's pendulous. The branches tend to hang down more, it's more pendulous in its character, whereas downy birch doesn't really do that so much. So look out for that in the canopy. Also, downy birch, true to their name, have hairier twigs. The fresh young twigs have a finer hair to them. But I will say this, the two birches also hybridize between them, so you might see features of one and the other on the same tree. So it can be difficult to tell between the two, but in summer it is easier because there's something with the leaves as well that you can look at. But look out for that pendulous nature, the hanging, like the weeping willow kind of quality. That's more silver birch than downy birch. Caroline says, rhyme, oak before ash, you're in for a splash. Ash before oak, you're in for a soak. Is this true? If so, why? That's interesting. It's not true. There's not really much of a basis for it. They've done study on it, looking at the weather. It's not true at all. But what is interesting there is that the old rhyme is saying, oak before ash, in for a splash, ash before oak, in for a soak. They're talking about when those two trees come into leaf. So is the oak going to come into leaf before the ash, or the other way around? What this rhyme tells us is that the oak and the ash are the last two native trees to come into leaf. So that's useful. For the tree idea, as we mentioned with the ash before, we're going to see that winter twig for longer, the bare twig without leaves. If we're seeing that in late spring, it could well be an ash or an oak. They're the two last our native trees to come into leaf. So that is a useful tidbit we can take out of that old rhyme. Okay, last couple of questions. Gina has a sambuca tree, perhaps in a garden, nothing like an elder. It has dark leaves and pink flowers. There are cultivated varieties of Sambucus nigra, the elder, which have dark purple leaves and more pink flowers, and they've been cultivated for that. But yeah, they're an elder of a sort. Do you need a male and female holly tree to get berries? Beth asks. Only the female holly tree has berries. So some trees are what we call dioecious, which means there are male trees and female trees, whereas some trees have the male and female parts on the same tree. So Hazel has the male catkins and those red female flowers, same tree. Holly has the male flowers on one tree, and there are female flowers which then turn into the berries. So if you've seen the berries, it's a female. In order to get berries, they need to be fertilized. So there must be a male somewhere in the vicinity. So that's why we don't always see berries on holly. It could be a male or it could be unfertile. Michael asks, how do you tell the difference between hawthorn and blackthorn? I addressed that exact question, Michael, in the last winter tree workshop that I ran. So you'll be sent a link to that via email. Have a look at that. There's a whole section on the difference between the two, blackthorn and hawthorn, and that will answer your question. Can field maple be tapped for sap like birch? This is what Connor asks. So sugar maples in Canada and New England are tapped to make maple syrup. Can field maple be tapped? I've never heard about it being done. I suspect it would be tapped, but whether there's a sweet taste to it, I suspect there isn't, because I've never read a wild food book where somebody said, field maple sap's okay. You can do it with sycamore. It's all right. It's not really worth it. Just, you know, maple syrup is far superior. I've not tried it with field maple, but if it was a thing, I would have heard about it or seen it written. I think sap will come out, but I don't think it would be sweet. Okay. Jolene asked, what is your website? I randomly found this event on Facebook. Not sure if I can trace you back to your website. Woodland Classroom, woodlandclassroom.com. That's our website. You'll find out all about myself and Lee there, based in North Wales, and all the courses that, all the services we usually do run. There's not a lot of courses out at the minute because of lockdown. There are a couple of things coming up. There'll be a lot more coming soon, Jolene, so look out for that. But if you sign up to the Tree ID course, I will get in touch with you that way as well, and you'll find out about all the stuff we've got coming up. Okay, I fancy doing one more question. Rich McManus asks, do all birch trees have flammable bark? Are there any other trees that exhibit this behaviour? What Rich is talking about is in bushcraft, we peel off birch bark as a fire lighter because it's really impregnated with natural oils and it goes up like a rocket. Very easy to take a light from. Birches, all birches do it. Are there any other barks that do it? Cherry doesn't do it. You would think it might do with the peeling property and that sap that kind of comes out of it. It looks like resin, but that doesn't catch fire. But what does is conifers. If you think conifers like the spruce particularly, they bleed this sap that comes to, or resin that comes out of it. It looks like candle wax dripping down. If you pick that, that's also easy to light as well. It won't light from a spark, but it will light from a flame and it will accelerate a fire. But I don't know of any other barks that do that. Okay, folks, plenty of questions, but we're kind of out of time, really. I think I've taken enough of your evening up. But I really hope you've enjoyed this. Lots of information there, and there's plenty more on the free course. So do check it out. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate you spending an hour with me. Stay safe, everyone. Enjoy your local green patches however you can, and get out there and enjoy winter and identify those trees. And if you have any questions, drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you. And I hope to see you all again very soon. We'll be doing this again in spring for Spring Tree ID, looking at catkins, blossom, flowers, and all those emerging leaves. So I hope to see you in spring for that one. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye for now. Thank you very much for watching the workshop. I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't watched the first workshop, do check that out. There's loads of other content there as well, including different questions from the live viewers on the night. So I hope you enjoy that. And I hope to see you soon on Kickstart Your Tree ID Skills, my free online course. Take care for now and happy tree hunting.